At some point in time, all of us have or will hit a plateau of sorts. This could be anything from, a business skill set, hobby, writing, typing, relationships, you name it. The good news is that if we are capable of identifying them, then that means we are also capable of moving through them. This concept came to me when I was researching a topic, and it's known as the OK plateau. I read it in a book, and in this book, the character, his name is Josh, he is trying to learn how to speed memorize a deck of cards so that he can compete in these really high level tournaments. And he gets to a point where he just cannot memorize these cards any faster. Like, doesn't matter how much he tries, it's just, he hit a plateau. He can't break through it. His mentor tells him to begin studying typing. And at first I was like, typing? What does that have to do with memorizing? But incidentally, that is the place where the OK plateau is the most common and is the most, you see it happen very quickly. He found that people go from, very sloppy, like finger pecking, typing to, very cautious, full hand, all finger typing to like, full on robotic mode where your fingers just like have, a mind of their own and they basically work automatically. And what's interesting is that at that point, that is when the typing speed usually stops. They hit a plateau right there when it becomes automated and unconscious. And if you think about it, this is very strange because we're told that practice makes perfect. Yet not all of us, but most of us use typing on pretty much a daily basis. I mean, I type thousands and thousands of words a week, and my speed has not increased more than I think like 90 or 95 words per minute. That's it. Like, I can practice all I want, I can type as much as I want, it doesn't increase. And like, that doesn't make sense, right? Like, even though we're continuously using this skill, it's not continuously getting better. So why don't we just keep getting better and better? In the 1960s, two psychologists decided to try to answer this question by laying out 3 phases of learning. And these are the 3 phases that everybody goes through when they learn something new. The first stage is known as the cognitive phase. Now, this is the part where you're focused and you're intellectualizing the process, and you're trying to discover new strategies and ways that you can improve and get more efficient at it. The second stage is called the associative stage. And this is where, you're concentrating less, it's making, it's kind of becoming a little bit more natural, you're making fewer mistakes, and you're generally becoming more proficient with your skill. And finally, we reach the autonomous phase, which is where we basically are just running on autopilot. During this stage, we lose conscious control over what we're doing, which most of the time is a good thing, right? You don't want to have to consciously think out every letter that you're typing. It's less for your mind to worry about, and it's something that we can do without realizing that is very, very efficient, and it saves a lot of bandwidth in your mind, and prevents you from getting serious brain fog every time you have to sit down and type something out or play a piano song or whatever the case may be. In fact, the autonomous phase is actually very, very handy and we use it quite a bit, and without us actually realizing it. We often just take it for granted until something gets switched around, where you hop in your car to go to your friend's house and you end up at your grocery store because your mind just went into autopilot. It's like, oh, we're going to the store, whoop, and you go over there to the store and autopilot kind of took over. So that's what we tend to notice, those moments more than when we see it actually working effectively. So once we get good at something like typing, or you fill in the blank with whatever skill that you learn, it basically just moves to the back of our minds and we stop thinking about it. It goes into a filing cabinet back there, and it's like, we don't even pull it out to worry about it anymore. And it's very interesting how in fMRI scans, you can actually see this happen in the mind. When you get good at something and automation starts happening, the parts of the brain that are the conscious reasoning, they become much less active, and the other parts of the brain just take over. In other words, consciously or unconsciously, you decide that you are good enough at something, you switch into autopilot, and you stop improving. And quite frankly, we live a lot of our lives in this final stage. Like, we learn how to drive when we're teenagers, and we get good enough to avoid getting speeding tickets and major accidents. And we basically only improve in small increments for the rest of our lives. The OK plateau is how someone can play golf for 20 or 30 years and basically not get any better. And I'm hoping you're beginning to see how this goes a lot farther than just, being good at a game of golf. Like, if we live our lives like this in the OK plateau, we'll get to a point where we pretty much feel okay with ourselves. And at that point, we basically just stop improving. And you'll recognize this if you've ever seen someone, who's 50 years old, who pushed through that okay plateau and they didn't sit there. And if you take them and compare them to someone who's also 50 and hit their okay plateau in their, mid 20s or 30s and stayed there ever since, and they just kind of doing this number, the two people are usually dramatically different. And I've seen this a few times, and it's just like, it blows me away because I'm like, whoa, I want to be like that when I'm older. Like, I want to be full of energy. I want to be learning stuff. I want to be like growing and expanding the way that person is. One of the psychologists named Dr. Erickson studied the best of the best in many different fields, and he found that top achievers follow the same basic pattern for development. They develop strategies that help them to stay outside of the autonomous phase while they are practicing. And they do this by applying 3 things. They focus on their technique, they stay goal-oriented, and they get consistent and immediate feedback on their performance. In other words, they force themselves to stay in the cognitive phase. Now, I'm planning on showing you some practical ways that you can do this in your day-to-day life. But again, I hope you realize the deeper implications of this. Like, if you want to take this and apply it to a skill set or whatever, that's totally awesome, totally fine. Please do that. But I'm gonna go a little bit deeper with it, and I'm gonna work on applying this to my life and living a lifestyle of this. Okay, if we can all agree that we don't want to live the majority of our lives in autopilot and we want to make the most out of our lives, which I think we all can agree to, then I'd like to leave you with some actionable, like day-to-day stuff that you can apply to your life. The best way to get out of the autonomous phase and get out and through the okay plateau, Erickson found, is to actually practice failing. Take something like chess, for example. A master in chess is often not defined by how many games he plays, but instead how many hours he spends going through every one of his previous games, move by move, and working through all of his mistakes and losses. The same thing applies to, say, speed typers. If they want to break through that plateau, it's actually relatively easy. The way they do it is they flash words on the screen that the typers need to type, but they flash them up at about 10 to 15% faster than what they're used to. And at first, it's terrible. They're making a ton of mistakes because they're being forced to go faster than what they're comfortable with. They mess up like crazy, but that's the point. The point is to force them to speed up. And over time, their mistakes get less and less and less until they've broken through that plateau, and that is their new base foundation now. And from there, they just keep improving. So how can we actually do this in our day-to-day lives? Well, one great way to do this is by obtaining immediate feedback. A remarkable author that I thoroughly enjoy is Brian Tracy, and he says repeatedly that you cannot improve something that you don't track. And so getting immediate feedback and immediate results on your actions and whatever you're doing is critical. This is how experts and high achievers find new ways to continue to improve their performance and continue to break through their okay plateaus. For me, this takes a very simple way of just starting a notes tab on my phone and just putting something in there of, here's the date, here's what I'm doing, here's how long it took me to do it. It literally takes less than a minute to, hit a stopwatch and just let it run. And when you're finished, log it. And then you see, okay, here's my track record. I'm improving. Okay, this time I did terrible, oh, I had distractions that time, check social media, whatever. Okay, you begin to see things because you're tracking it. And it's wildly simple, but yet we don't do it. And it's like, so that raises the question, it's like, okay, how bad do you actually want to improve? So define that first before you get all excited about this, and define whether or not you're actually willing to do these things to get that immediate feedback, because that gives you something tangible. That gives you something you can grasp. Like, you can see that and it makes perfect sense to your mind. It's not just some nebulous thing floating around anymore. And you can work with that and you can try different strategies, and okay, this strategy, wow, that like cut off 20 minutes. That's okay, let's keep doing that strategy. And it's also interesting how jobs that do not give immediate feedback, the participants in those jobs actually tend to get worse at their job as time goes. And it's really scary because there's some jobs in the medical field that are this way, where they do their job, but they don't get the results for like a couple weeks later. And statistically, those people in their jobs pretty much get worse and worse as they go. Whereas you take an occupation like, being a surgeon, where the results pretty much immediate. So those people, you know, their careers tend to steadily get better as they go. In the book, he talks about the mindset of an amateur. And I think that that's really, really critical because we don't like thinking about ourselves like that, right? Like, but if we really want to continue to grow and increase in our efficiency or what have you, then we have to approach it like amateurs. We have to approach it from a different perspective, a new perspective, and we have to be willing to do things that fail and that are wrong. And by doing that, we expand our level of experiences and we learn new tactics and new strategies. Take something for me like productivity. I'm like, okay, I have my systems and I nail them down and it works. But then I'm like, okay, if I was approaching this brand new, like I'd never done this before, how would I do it? And you know, how would an amateur do this? I think about that and I'm like, like maybe this gives me something to try. Maybe I should try doing this. Maybe I should try something completely different. And that's really, really impactful is the mindset of the amateur, as it were. Another great way that I've found to do this is by pushing myself to go faster than I'm comfortable with. Basically the typing method, where you set deadlines, you make yourself accountable to people, where you force yourself to go through things and do things faster, or in a new way, or just something, maybe it's mundane, something that you've done it before. It's like, I'm gonna do this a completely different way. It'll make you think differently about it, and you'll begin seeing different ways that you can do it. And sometimes we get forced into those things, where one time I had to go give a talk in front of a crowd of people, and I didn't know about it until like 15 minutes beforehand. You work really, really fast in those moments, and like I used very specific ways of doing it, and I felt like it went pretty well. So that very much required me to move faster than what I was comfortable with. And it taught me some very, very valuable things that I still apply to my life today. And again, it comes back to doing things that we are not comfortable with doing. Okay, we like to do things that we're good at, right? Because we don't like to fail. When you do something you're not good at or you're not familiar with, you're gonna mess up, and we don't like doing that, so we tend to avoid it. And that shows the difference between a professional like piano player and an amateur. The amateur will play for 5 years and maybe learn, they'll learn stuff, but they tend to just repeatedly play the songs that they already know. The expert will play for 5 years and they're constantly pushing themselves and doing things that are way beyond their level of comfort and performance, because it forces them to stretch and grow in new ways that the amateur just doesn't even see. And usually that is the difference between high achievers and low achievers. And the difference there is not necessarily the time, the difference is how they practice. A fantastic example of me actually doing this is I made a video where I literally sat down and read an entire book in one sitting because I wasn't sure if I could do it. And so I decided that I was gonna do it. And so that was a case where I was like, really stretching. And I learned a lot of great things about focus and intentionality and being disciplined and sitting for a really long time. So yeah, if you want to check that video out, I'll put it in the dead center of the screen right here.